I've been sitting in this bar for about 3 hours now and I still don't know what I'm going to do. I was hoping that a couple of strong drinks would bring me wisdom, but all they did was give me a headache, and when I closed my eyes, I still saw the scene that made me run away from home. She's cheating on me. I ran out of the house, got into the car, and drove like crazy for 2 days, stopping and sleeping in the car when I was tired, eating crap from the stores at the gas stations where I stopped for gas, and driving on until I was completely exhausted and slowed down when got to this place, wherever it is. It was early in the morning, but I needed somewhere to crash, so I just drove around town until I saw this bar with flashing neon lights proclaiming it to be a traveler's oasis. I decided that if I could get seriously drunk, the pain would go away, but I've always been a lousy drinker. I always have been. I think it's my grandmother's fault. She used a rod when she caught me drinking beer with others. But damn, that was almost 20 years ago. I was contemplating the most serious question I could afford, whether to order another shot with a drink or find a quiet room where I could finish everything, when an older man sat down on a stool next to me and quietly asked if he could buy me a drink. Well, the first thing I did was give him an eagle-eyed look to make sure he didn't think I was one of those fancy guys. He noticed my gaze and simply smiled, told me not to worry. Bill Austin. As is typical for me, I had my first beer a little after 10 a.m. I have maintained this routine 3 times a week for the past year, ever since Mary, my wife, died. I don't know why I came here. I never get drunk. As a matter of fact, I have never been drunk in my life. I just love it here, and I get to watch the most interesting people this way. Now I don't have to answer for them, so I can just watch and imagine their problems and lives without thinking about how to help them. For example, now there is only one person in the bar who sits at the counter and drinks straight whiskey and beer, which is a sure sign of a person with a big problem. I've been watching him since he arrived. He really looked lost and in some kind of pain, probably because of a woman, most likely. This is the most common problem for men of his age. But for some reason, this particular person touched something in me, and I felt a faint peak of interest. This in itself was unusual, since I had stopped worrying about almost anything since Mary left. On a random impulse, I moved to the stool next to him and offered to buy him a drink. I wanted to hear his voice and maybe make him talk. I must have been staring at him because he noticed my gaze and misunderstood it. He seemed to think I liked men. Damn it, it was really funny. I decided it was better to explain myself. Calm down, kid. I was sitting there in that booth and noticed that you seem to have a big problem. I have a lot of free time now that I'm retired and a widower. Just wanted to buy you a drink and offer a friendly ear. Ben Chase. I looked at him and relaxed. He seemed to be what he said he was. At least I was willing to accept the free drink and trust that he was old enough that I could put him down if he tried. And anyway, I really wanted to talk. I don't mind a drink and a friendly ear. Are you sure you want to hear my sad story? I don't have anything better to do and I hate drinking alone. Let's go to my booth where it's quieter. I hate yelling. Well, since we were the only 2 people in the bar at the time, I didn't plan on shouting much since it was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking behind the bar. But damn it, I would satisfy the old man. We went back to his booth, and I sat down across from him with a double shot and a beer. I placed both in front of me and looked at the old man. My name is Ben Chase. I'm from Chester, Pennsylvania, a couple of days away. And by the way, where the hell am I? He just laughed and told me, "Well, Ben, you found yourself in a wonderful place called Dayton, Indiana. Looks like you were just heading west on I-70, and that brought you here. Nice to meet you, Ben. My name is Bill Austin, and I live just a block away from here. Lived here all my life. My wife Alice died about a year ago, leaving me with a broken heart and many wonderful memories. But enough about me. What's your story?" Honestly, I wanted to talk, and Bill seemed more than willing to listen to my story if that's what I wanted. Well, I wanted to. I needed to tell someone. First, Bill, I need to give you some background on why I'm here. If I had just told you that I found out my wife was cheating on me, it wouldn't be such a big deal, and you'd think I'm what a weakling who ran away like I did. But there's more to it than just that. I'll just start, and you just intervene if I say something you don't understand, okay? Sounds good to me. Just tell it in your own way and in your own words. I'll try to let you talk without interrupting. So I took a double shot and quickly chugged it, then took a sip of beer and began my story. I grew up in a loving family with my father and mother. We lived in Weirton, West Virginia, and my dad, Howard Chase, worked in the steel mill there. He worked in the rolling mill and was a shift foreman. He made good money for his time and was always reliable and did his job for his salary. He learned self-discipline in the county system, growing up as an orphan. He didn't know how he got there, and no one had information about his biological parents. But since he got there late, almost. For 7 years, he was never adopted. He stayed in the system until he was 18, and then he was released with $20 and a cardboard suitcase containing everything he owned. He found work in the steel mills nearby and worked as many shifts as he could. Once he had worked there for 90 days, he joined the union and became a full-time employee of the plant. He made good money for that time, bought a car, and found an apartment that he could rent. He continued to work and apply for all jobs that were above the level he had at that time. Shift work didn't bother him, so he often got good jobs because no one else with more seniority wanted to work night shifts. Everything seemed to be fine. My dad met my mom, Pauline, at work, and they dated for 2 years before he finally proposed to her. They got married, and Dad used some of his savings to buy them a small 2-bedroom house away from the smoke of the factory and a little outside the city. Mom loved the place and always seemed happy with what they had. I remember her telling me when I was growing up that this was a home to be proud of, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Mom and Dad waited a couple of years to have me. I was born 3 years after their wedding, and my mother was able to quit her job when she was about 6 months before giving birth. She spent time clearing out the second bedroom and preparing it for my arrival. She was happy, and so was Dad. At least that's what my grandmother later told me. I just remember the ceiling of that room when I was old enough to see things. It was sky blue with little white clouds painted on it. There was a lamp covered with a shade that made it look like the sun. I always remember this ceiling. I loved this ceiling. He made me feel safe and secure. This is how I feel when I think about him. Basically, I grew up in this house. My mother was at home with me for the first 5 years of my life. I remember her quite well. She had pale skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. She was little, I remember that. She most often carried me on her hip and always took me with her. To the grocery store, shopping, to church, and sometimes to the park where there were swings, seesaws, and sandboxes. I loved the slide when she was waiting for me at the bottom for me to slide down into her waiting arms. When I went to school, my mother decided to go back to work. I think her dad asked her to stay home, but she wanted to get out of the house and do something. Finally, she got a job at a local doctor's office. She walked to work, so it was close. But even though she worked, she was home every day when I got home from school, and she was always part of our dinner in the evenings. We always tried to have dinner together. That was one of her rules. Even as I got older and started playing sports, participating in activities with other kids, and doing what all kids do, I knew I had to be home for dinner. When I was 8 years old, I came home for dinner one night to find Mom and Dad just sitting at the kitchen table. I looked around, but didn't see dinner ready. When I asked my mom what happened, she just looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she couldn't cook dinner that night. She got up and prepared something for Dad and me to eat, but did not sit down at the table herself. Instead, she went to bed and did not return that evening. When I asked Dad what happened, he didn't say anything. He just said it was an adult thing, but I remember he was crying too. Listen, can we get some coffee here? Telling this story is hard enough. I don't need to get drunk to tell it better. Carry on with your story. I'll call the waiter to bring us this stuff they call coffee. Carry on. It's a damn good story. That whole week at home, everything was different. Mom and Dad barely spoke to each other, and our dinners were quiet and tense. I now understand that Dad was angry with Mom, and Mom tried very hard to talk to Dad, but he refused to answer her most of the time. I hated it, but I was too young to understand what was going on. I never knew until much later when Granny Pearl told me. That Mom was always crying, and Dad was working more and more at the factory. After a few weeks, Dad stopped coming home for dinner, and we stayed only with Mom. She was so quiet that I was afraid that she was sick, but when I asked, she just said that she was sad. She tried to be strong, but she couldn't deceive me. Nothing much changed for us over the next few weeks, but I saw Dad getting quieter and Mom getting sadder. I didn't understand, but I knew it was bad. I realized it was serious when Dad started sleeping in the small room we had just off the hallway. It wasn't much bigger than a closet, but Mom always called it our living room. We never used it, and Dad always intended to open it up and make the living room bigger. Now he installed a cot there and started sleeping there. I came home from school one afternoon and saw cars and people everywhere and some police officers in the house. I ran inside to find out what happened, but Grandma was there and grabbed me when I tried to walk past her to find my mom. She held me tightly and didn't let go. I started crying and squirming to get free, but she finally made me stop and look into her eyes. I stopped struggling and asked her what happened. Grandma, what happened? Where are Mom and Dad? Did something happen to Mom? No, boy. Your mother is fine. It's your father. He had a terrible accident. He's gone, boy. He's gone, and he's not coming back. No, no, it's not true. My dad wouldn't have left without me. It's not true. Grandma held me tightly on her chest and rocked me back and forth until I calmed down. Finally, she let me go and took me to my mother. She sat in the living room with her arms wrapped around her knees and her head down so that I could only see the top of her head. She was very calm and just rocked back and forth, back and forth. I ran up to her and tried to hug her, but she barely noticed me. I called her, but she did not answer. The police walked around the house and looked everywhere, but Mom didn't say anything to stop them. I was getting scared, but my grandmother came and picked me up and took me to the kitchen, making me sit down. I wanted to get up and run to the living room where Dad was sleeping, but the police blocked the corridor, and in any case, my grandmother would not let me go. It looked like the cops had been there for hours, and my mom was sitting in the living room talking to them. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't care. I wanted them to leave our house and for Mom to tell me about Dad. What happened and why did he leave? What accident happened to him? What happened? I was panicked and afraid, and my heart was broken. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't because I didn't know what to cry about. Only 3 days later, my mother came to my grandmother to pick me up. That day, I went home with my grandmother, and she kept me with her. I didn't even go to school for 3 days, and I knew something serious had happened. I have never stayed home since school. But when Mom came into the house, she seemed better and even smiled at me when I ran up to her. She held me in her arms and pressed her cheek against my hair and just held me. I hugged her just as tightly. She took me to my grandmother and told her that it was time for me to come home. Grandma simply nodded in agreement, and we returned to our house. The first thing I noticed was that Dad wasn't there. His jacket wasn't hanging on the hook, and his lunchbox was missing. His work boots weren't in the hallway where he kept them, and there wasn't a change of clothes on the hook for when he got home. I went into the living room and looked at his cot and things, but there was nothing. Then I realized that Dad had left. I asked my mom about this, but she just said that Dad had gone to a better place and that I should pray for him. She didn't say anything more then, but after that it became clear that Dad was gone forever. Remember, I was 8 years old at the time and had no idea what happened, but I found out less than a year later when one of my friends at school told me the truth. He told me that my dad killed himself one night at home. He said that Dad took his gun and shot it right in the bathroom of our house. He said that my mother found him and called the police. That was the day I came home from school and saw all these police officers. That's what happened then. When I asked my mother about this in the evening, She was silent for a long time, but finally took me by the hands and told me the truth. It was true that Dad killed himself. She told me as little as possible, but said it was true and that she came home and found him there. She was sorry it took her so long to tell me, but she wanted to make sure she had the right words for me. She wanted me to know that he was a very good person, but that things had become too difficult for him, and he thought this was the only way to cope with them. I told her that our priest in church always said that this was a sin, but Mom got angry and said that Dad would be forgiven. He was a good man and did what he thought was right. From that day on, my mother was always at home with me. She did not return to work and stayed at home almost all the time. I never saw her go out except to get groceries or to take me somewhere. She quit church and work and no longer invited people into the house. She was quiet and reserved, but she was never strict with me. She made sure I did my schoolwork and was always prepared for tests and exams. But I noticed that she was becoming sadder every day. It had been almost a year since Dad died when she told me she wanted me to stay with Grandma for a while. She said she had things to take care of and that I would be okay with Grandma. I didn't want to leave, but in the end I had no choice. My grandmother picked me up on Friday evening and I stayed with her for the weekend. On Monday, I expected my mother to pick me up at school, but she didn't come. When I asked Grandma, she said she would take me home instead, and we could see what Mom was up to. We ate breakfast, and I helped her clear the tables so we could go. We drove home, and Grandma stopped at the house. I jumped out of the car before it could stop and ran into the house. I smelled a strange smell as soon as I opened the door, but I didn't understand what it was. I called my mother, but received no answer. I ran down the corridor to her room and looked inside. She was lying on the bed. I thought she was sleeping, but when I tried to wake her, she did not move. I touched her hand and quickly pulled my hand away, feeling how cold it was. I came closer to her face and immediately saw that it was very pale and cold. Suddenly, I understood. She was dead. I remember screaming for my grandmother and then nothing else. Almost a week passed before I was able to return home with my grandmother. The doctors said I had a traumatic episode, whatever that means. I was a child and found my mother dead. What else can you call it, and why was everyone surprised that I passed out for a while? Well, I passed out. But after that, I returned home to my grandmother and tried to think as little as possible about my parents until I almost forgot about them. I was left to my own devices. They both left me and didn't care about me. They just left. But my grandmother was the real mover, and she made sure that I had little free time to think or be depressed. She raised me from then on, and I grew up mostly normal. For my 18th birthday, my grandmother bought me an old car that I could fix and drive. We didn't have much money, but it was much more than I had hoped for. I told her it was the best gift ever, and for me it truly was. She let me fuss with her until late in the evening before calling me into the house. After I washed up and went downstairs to watch TV before bed, Grandma said she had something else for me. I was immediately interested, expecting another gift, but instead she handed me a letter. This letter is from your mother, boy. She left it when she committed suicide. It's addressed to you. She said she would give it to you on your 18th birthday. That's today. I wasn't sure whether to give it to you or not, but it was her wish, so I'm giving it to you. I remember thinking, I don't want this stupid letter. I have my new car and my grandmother gave it to me. Mom didn't give it to me. Mom wasn't even here, so why should I care? This made me a little angry. You kept it all these years? Why did you wait? She died because she didn't care enough about me to stay and try to raise me. She left it to you, so why do you care about what she wanted? Respect your dead mother, boy. She was my daughter, and I knew her better. You don't know anything. She and your father did what they did for their own reasons. It's not your place or mine to judge them. God will do it. Now, do you want this letter or not? It's up to you. Of course I took it. It was from her, and I wanted to know what she wanted to tell me. She couldn't tell me then, so she probably thought it would get easier with time. I did not know. Anyway, I took it and put it in my room in my sock drawer. I didn't open it right away. It took me almost a week to work up the courage. Grandma never asked me about it, and I never mentioned it again. Well, anyway, I finally opened it and read it. But instead of telling you what it was, I'll let you read it for yourself. With these words, I took out my folded letter and laid it out on the table. I was careful not to tear it as it was quite frayed and wrinkled, but it could be read. I looked at it for a minute before handing it to Mr. Austin to read for himself. That's what was written there. My dear Ben, if your grandmother did as I asked, when you read this, you are already an adult. I know that you think that I left you alone and that I didn't care about you. I swear to you, this is not true, and I can only hope that you will understand after reading what I have to tell you. You were too young to understand then. I loved your father with all my heart, but I did something that hurt him deeply. You know, I worked in a doctor's office where I met a lot of people. There was a nice gentleman who was very sick, and the doctor told him that he didn't have long to live. We became friends with him when he visited the doctor and talked about our lives and families while he waited. I told him about my wonderful family, about you and your father, but he had no one. His wife died, he had no children, and he was alone. I felt sorry for him. One day he invited me to dinner, and I agreed, thinking that as a friend it would be okay. We went to lunch, but things got complicated, and I ended up going to his house and sleeping with him. It was a terrible thing to do, but at that moment all I could think about was making his last days more pleasant. He was in such pain. Your father and I loved each other, and I thought that what I did would not affect our life with him. This man was grateful, but wanted to continue to see me. At first I refused, thinking about the guilt I felt for cheating on your father. But in the end, seeing the pain he felt and the small amount of joy one that I brought to him, I agreed, and we continued to meet and sleep together. I swear to you that I was only trying to make his last days more bearable and enjoyable. I had no feelings for him other than friendship. I never saw it as cheating on your father, but I felt so bad about what I did that I eventually told him the truth. This was the day our lives changed forever. I begged Howard to forgive me and tried to explain why I did it, but he didn't listen. We argued, and he became increasingly distant and pushed me away. I knew that trust was very important to your father, but I never saw what I did as a matter of trust. That's why I finally told him. I couldn't live with secrets from him. However, your father saw it differently. I was devastated, but I never understood the depth of his pain. I hurt him badly, but I didn't understand it at the time. I was too preoccupied with my own guilt and fear of losing him and my beautiful family. I was only worried about myself. I failed him in many ways. But we were still together, and he never asked me to leave, so I hoped things would get better if I just waited and dedicated myself to making him happy. The day I went to find out the latest news about my friend, your father shot himself. I found out later that he knew where I was going, although I didn't tell him anything. I just wanted to know if my friend was alive, but your father didn't understand. He saw this as the final betrayal and committed suicide. He left a note for me, but I destroyed it before the police came. She was so cruel and accusing, and I deserved every word he said, but I couldn't bear those evil words, so I destroyed her. He died without ever forgiving me. I tried to live with the guilt of what I did to him and what I made him do, but I couldn't go on. The pain he felt was now mine, and I couldn't live with that burden. It grew inside me until I was afraid it would consume me. I tried to live despite the pain and be a good mother for you, but the pain did not go away. It grew on its own until it became everything I felt. I'm planning to commit suicide. I hope and pray that God will forgive me and that I will have the opportunity in my next life to apologize to Howard. I'm sorry I won't get to see you grow and prosper, but I know I can no longer be a good mother to you. The pain is too much, and I'm afraid it will destroy you too if I continue to live with it. Your grandmother will take care of you and give you a good home. This is all I have left to give you. Please try to forgive me. Your loving mother, Pauline. Bill finished reading the letter with tears in his eyes. I knew this feeling. I cried many times when I read this letter. To this day, I don't know if I forgave her, but I didn't hate her anymore. In fact, I didn't hate any of them. They abandoned me because of their pain, forgetting about the pain that will remain with me. But they were my parents, and I loved them despite their shortcomings. Well, after I read the letter, I finally understood what happened to my parents. It was tragic, but now it made sense. Mom was right at the time. I wouldn't have understood. Now that I read the letter again, I understood why they did what they did, but I still couldn't forgive them for leaving me alone. These feelings may fade with time, but not yet. But now I was 18, and I used the trust fund, which my mom and dad set up for me to go to college years ago. I finally graduated with a chemical engineering degree and went to work for a big oil company where I saw a lot of the world. It was a great experience, but I wanted to settle in the States and build my life in this big world. You know, Bill, I want to tell you the rest of the story, but right now I feel terrible and I need to lie down and sleep. I'm really exhausted and haven't eaten or slept in 2 days, and I just need to collapse. I'll go to the car and try to sleep for a few hours, and then, if you're still here, I'll continue. Sure, but I think you need to come home with me and sleep in the bed, not in the car. I have a spare bedroom, and no one has used it in years. My kids rarely come over since my wife died. So I'm alone. Let's go eat something and then sleep. With these words, Bill helped me up, and we left the bar and walked along a quiet street to his house. I don't remember much about the journey, except that it didn't take long, and before I knew it, I was sitting in his kitchen with a cup of coffee and a ham and cheese sandwich. I ate a sandwich and drank coffee, but I was so exhausted that Bill helped me to a cozy little room with a double bed and a chintz coverlet. It felt like heaven, so I fell onto the bed and fell asleep before I even felt the rebound. I didn't even feel Bill take off my shoes and jacket. I was dead to the world. Bill Austin. After he ate the sandwich I made him, Ben was almost dead on his feet. He was unsteady in his chair, so I picked him up. I barely managed to get him into bed before he passed out. He was truly dead to the world. I looked at him sleeping there and realized that this man was really suffering. He told me part of his story, and I realized that I knew what would happen next. And if my suspicions are correct, Ben is in for a tough time. I knew this because I have been a practicing psychologist for the last 30 years. I knew people and had the gift of empathy, which helped me help hundreds of people during this time. I haven't practiced for over 2 years since Mary, my wife, got sick. I couldn't help others when I was suffering greatly myself. But Mary died and I had few interests. Ben interested me. He seemed like a decent man who had suffered greatly and was struggling with the emotions that were tearing him apart. His past was steering him towards serious harm to himself or someone else, but his innate decency seemed to be pushing him in the other direction. He was emotionally torn. I took off his shoes and jacket and took a blanket from the closet. I was about to cover him with a blanket and let him sleep when I made a decision. I reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. I quickly opened it and found one of those emergency contact cards. It said his wife's name and phone number, and I copied it onto a note card. I put his wallet back and covered him with a blanket. He quietly went out and closed the blinds. It was already after dinner, and there was light outside, but the blinds made the room very dark, so he would probably sleep for several hours. I walked down the hall to the small office I still kept in our small house and sat down at my desk. I haven't been here for several months. I turned on the table lamp that Mary gave me for one of the Christmas holidays. As her yellow light played on the table, memories came flooding back and I hesitated for a moment, but decided to continue with my original plan. I used the phone on my desk, which I kept only for my practice, with a number blocked so that no one could use caller ID to get my number. Sometimes a psychiatrist can make some very strange people evil. I called his home number, hoping to hear his wife, and only heard the phone ring once when she answered. Ben, is that you? Ben, talk to me, please. Is this Mrs. Chase? Mrs. Annabeth Chase? Are you Ben Chase's wife? Yes, this is Beth Chase. Who are you, and did something happen to Ben? Is he hurt? Please tell me he's okay. My name is Bill, and Ben is fine. He's sleeping with me now. It's been hard for him, and he needs to sleep and calm down. He's emotionally exhausted. No, I need to talk to him. I need to talk to him right now. Please hand him over so I can talk to him. I'm afraid I won't do that. He shouldn't be talking to you in this mood right now. He's a very angry and upset person, and I believe you're the reason for that anger. It wouldn't be nice if you talked to him right now. Oh God, what did he tell you? What did he say? Oh, I need to talk to him and explain to him what he saw. Please, whoever you are, let me talk to him. What do you know about his parents? What did he tell you? This is very important, Mrs. Chase, so I need you to answer honestly. I was very concerned about her answer. If she knew about his past and how his parents died and why they did it, then she was guilty of stupidity at best and extreme cruelty at worst. I needed to understand her role in this first before going any further. I don't know what you're talking about. Ben's parents died when he was very young, and he was raised by his grandmother. What does that have to do with anything? Did he tell you how they died? No, he just said they died by accident, and he didn't like talking about it. That's why I never insisted. Now can I talk to him? Mrs. Chase, I am a professional psychiatrist, and I am going to talk to your husband a little more and then decide what to do with you. For now, you have no choice but to trust me, and I would really like you to think carefully about what you did to him and what you are going to tell him. He is in a very dangerous mood now, and it is better that he not be near you. It is also important that he be closely monitored, especially now. I don't understand anything. I insist that you let me talk to him right now. Goodbye, Mrs. Chase. Remember what I said. With that, I hung up before she could say more. She seemed unaware of his past, and therefore her only crime was cheating out of ignorance, at least for me. In Ben's eyes, she was like his mother, and she did to him what his mother did to his father. Ben was in the same cycle that his father was in, and it was a very dangerous time for him. I went back to the kitchen, made myself some dinner, and began to formulate a plan to work with Mr. Ben Chase. Although I was no longer practicing, I could not allow a person who was obviously suffering to leave, not when I had the knowledge and desire to help him. Mary would understand. Annabeth Chase. This phone call was the last straw. I hung up the phone and fell to my knees in the kitchen, sobbing. I felt my world collapse. I waited 2 days to hear from Ben, and now he wouldn't talk to me, or at least a man named Bill wouldn't let me talk to him. I made a big mistake by allowing George Jenkins to seduce me at home with his smooth talk and seductive behavior. It was just one time, after many weeks of persecution, but it was the only time Ben returned home early. He saw me and George together and ran out of the house before I could say his name. This happened 2 days ago, and now Ben has disappeared, and I don't know where he is. The person I spoke to was very strict with me and told me that I was the reason Ben ran away. Even though I knew it was probably true, he had no right to stop me from talking to him and trying to explain myself. Did he warn me that it might be dangerous for me to be around Ben? No, Ben would never hurt me. He loved me, I was sure of it, and he would forgive me if I could just talk to him. I got up from the floor and sat down at the kitchen table. I wiped my face of tears and forced myself to calm down. Crying didn't solve anything. I tried to remember what went wrong. I met George at Mann House, where I volunteered 3 days a week, helping out with lunch and dinner distribution. He showed up about 5 weeks ago and introduced himself to me as George Jenkins, a financial consultant with Walter Johnson Investments downtown. He said he wanted to dedicate some of his time to helping others, just like I did. He was very sincere, and I liked him immediately. I also admit that he was handsome and sexy. I immediately felt attracted to him and knew that I was flirting with him uncontrollably. I was married and had no right to do this, but I convinced myself that it was just harmless fun. George also seemed to enjoy the game, and I began to look forward to the days I worked with him. My life at home was fine, but there were times when Ben spent too much time at work. Lately, he had been spending most of his week at the site of the new oil refinery his company was building, and Ben was responsible for overseeing the installation of new cracker columns in the refining department. This was his project, and he didn't want anyone else to do it for him. I understood this, but it left me alone too often. That's no excuse, but it certainly was a factor. Ben would understand this if I could talk to him. I knew he would understand because he was one of the most understanding and kind men I have ever met. I now depended on his kindness and hoped for his understanding. I remembered the day I first met Ben. I was working as a realtor for a commercial real estate agency in Mount Lebanon, western Pennsylvania, when I received a call from him asking for an agent to show a property that was zoned industrial. I knew this area and told him that I would meet him there in half an hour. I didn't think about it anymore until I met him on the spot. My first impression of him was of a man about my age, but so handsome, with curly black hair, a well-built body and brown eyes that seemed to see right through me. He shook my hand with a confident grip and immediately treated me like an equal. I felt my face turn red as I shook his hand and looked into his eyes. He didn't seem to notice and just walked towards the station. I followed him slowly, trying to regain my professionalism. I finally caught up with him, and the next 2 hours passed in a very businesslike manner as we discussed the size and availability of the site, as well as zoning requirements and utility proposals from the city. It was time well spent as he signed a letter of intent to purchase the lot that same day. Since the property was selling for over $4.5 million, I expected to get a decent amount. When he called my office 2 weeks later, I answered his questions and agreed to have the necessary documents ready by the following Monday. He was very pleased with everything, and before completing our business, he invited me to dinner when he came to sign the papers. Without thinking, I agreed. We talked for a few more minutes, but I didn't remember the rest of the conversation. My head was still spinning from the dinner invitation. What came over me? I barely knew this man and was going to dinner with him on Monday night. But be that as it may, I was more pleased than anything else. That Monday was the beginning of my life as I now know it. Ben arrived at the office promptly at 5 p.m., and we went into a conference room with the other parties, and the deal was done by 6:15 p.m. Everyone shook hands, and Ben seemed pleased that everything went so smoothly. He asked if I needed to stay in the office or if we could start our evening earlier. Since my work for the day was completed, I agreed that we could leave immediately. Ben was pleased and said we could either go to his hotel and have a drink at the bar before dinner or go for an early dinner and then a movie or something. I chose the bar. I was still a little giddy from the bonus I received for completing the sale, and I let my inhibitions go away with a cocktail. I chose the raspberry daiquiri and enjoyed it so much that I had a second one. Ben stayed with the beer, but seemed to enjoy watching me as I drank the strong drink. He was very eloquent, and his conversations fascinated me as he talked about his travels around the world, to most of the oil-producing countries. He amazed me with names of places and stories of his strange experiences, and I listened intently to it all. We forgot about dinner, and the drinks had a big effect on me on an empty stomach. By 8:30 p.m., I was slurring my words, and Ben decided I needed to sober up. Instead of leaving me at the bar, he helped me up, and we went up to his room, where he ordered coffee through room service. I gratefully collapsed onto the large bed and closed my eyes. Ben gently woke me up to drink some coffee. He made me drink some hot drinks, and the caffeine started to take effect. I finally woke up after the second cup, and I felt a little embarrassed about my actions. However, Ben didn't say anything about it and just let me fully wake up while continuing the conversation. Now that I was completely sober and able to stand on my own, I offered to leave and let him have the rest of the evening. Ben stood up and walked over to me, putting his arm around my waist. "I'm really excited to spend the rest of the evening here with you. If you still want dinner, I can order it through room service. Otherwise, I'd be happy to just hold you in my arms." "This is great, just hold me. Suddenly, I'm not hungry anymore." I was sober enough to realize what was happening, and I felt like I wanted it. I looked into his deep, dark eyes and let myself get lost in them. I raised my arms and wrapped my arms around his neck, pressing my cheek against his shoulder. He hugged me tighter and kissed my hair. I closed my eyes, just enjoying the feel of his strong body and the smell of his musky aroma. The feelings from these memories were so intense that Annabeth had to stop. She was overcome with fear that she had ruined what she had with Ben. The pain was so intense that she burst into tears again and fell head first onto the table, sobbing uncontrollably. Ben Chase. I only woke up once, when it was dark outside, and it took me a while to realize where I was. Since the house was quiet and dark, I assumed that my master was sleeping, and it was already late. I lay there for a few minutes, trying to feel something other than pain, but that was all I could feel. I closed my eyes again and tried to imagine a warm beach against the blue ocean in a tropical resort, but all I saw was my wife with another man. I closed my eyes tightly and bit my lip so that the physical pain would drown out the mental suffering. It worked, and I allowed the physical pain to overcome the mental pain. I went back to sleep, trying to keep them separate. The next time I woke up, it was already morning, and the sun was shining through the cracks in the blinds. I thought I smelled coffee and swung my legs off the bed onto the soft carpet. I sat up, trying to wake up, and finally stood up to find the bathroom and relieve hours of bladder tension. I walked out of the room and saw the bathroom on the left down the short hallway. I made it to the door and found a neat bathroom with the typical guest soaps and towels. Anyway, all I had to do was pee and wash my face, so that's what I did. I noticed the shower and some large bath towels and thought, why not? I took a hot shower with a cold rinse and felt like a new person. I dried myself off with one of the big fluffy towels and got dressed in my dirty clothes. Well, at least the body was clean. I found Bill in the kitchen, and he greeted me with a cup of hot black coffee. I gratefully accepted the cup and took a sip of the strong drink, feeling my strength return. I raised my head and looked at him to see him looking at me. I hope I didn't say anything bad last night, but from the look in his eyes, there was nothing but friendliness and interest in him. Now I remember that I started telling him my story. I think it finally hit me during the story, and I don't remember much after that. Well, Bill, what did I do and how bad was it? I don't think I remember much about last night, except that you were there and we started talking. How much did I say before I passed out? You were fine, Ben, and we got along great. You were telling me about your parents, and we were just getting into it when it all finally fell on your shoulders. I just brought you here, gave you something to eat, and helped you get to bed before you fell right here on the floor. You look like you've benefited from your rest. How are you feeling this morning? 1,000% better than yesterday, that's for sure. I'm grateful for what you did for me, and I'm sorry for putting my problems on you. You shouldn't have done that for someone you didn't even care about. You know. Well, that's kind of what I used to do. I'm a psychiatrist, or at least I was. I haven't been practicing in over 2 years, but you got me interested, and frankly, I was dying of boredom. So I don't think that I did you a favor, it was rather selfish. Well, I'm grateful for the bed and food, but I don't want to intrude. I'm just going to leave if you show me where the bar is where I left my car. Well, I can do that, but honestly, I wish you would stay and finish your story. I was really interested in your family, and I was waiting to see what would happen next. I'll make us breakfast, we'll eat, and then we'll go to my office, and you'll finish telling your story. Please think about this while I cook the bacon and eggs. As he spoke, much of the previous night came back to me, and I remembered telling him about my parents and letting him read my mother's letter. I also remember feeling a little better after the story. Maybe I can stay and talk. Something good might come out of this, and I had no other place to go. When I thought about it, I realized that I had no desire to talk to Beth or even call her. The pain was still too much. Bill, as promised, cooked us a huge breakfast of bacon, eggs, hash browns, and hot buttery toast. It all went off without a hitch, and I enjoyed every bit of it. Bill also ate his share and seemed to enjoy the company. I remember he said his wife died about a year ago, so he must have been pretty lonely. He had no children or close relatives. We finished, I helped clear the table and dry the dishes while he washed, and we grabbed coffee and went to the room he called his office. It was dark, warm, and cozy, and I felt comfortable sitting in the soft leather chair while Bill took the swivel chair at the table. He looked right at home, and I could imagine him practicing his craft from that office. "Well, can you remind me where I stayed last night before I passed out? I just don't remember much after I gave you Mom's letter. You said you graduated from university with a degree in chemical engineering and saw a lot of the world, but wanted to settle down at home. Now I remember. I took my mother's letter, folded it neatly, and put it back in the tattered envelope and put it in my jacket pocket. At that moment, fatigue hit me, and I could barely stand on my feet. Okay, I'll start from here and see what happens. The company I was working for assigned me to manage new construction projects on the East Coast. We had several new refineries and crackers, and I had a lot of experience in those areas, so I traveled around the regions, inspecting sites, organizing contractors, setting schedules, and generally coordinating the work. I was a good coordinator, easy to get along with people, quick to adapt to change, and tough enough to get the job done without pissing everyone off. I was doing well financially and was able to save a lot of money for a rainy day. Everything was very good. That's when I met Annabeth Foster. Beth was a realtor, and we met at work. I had an affair with her, and we got to know each other over the course of a few weeks, and I finally asked her out. We had been dating for a while, and we both knew it was serious. Finally, after 6 months, I proposed to her, and she accepted. We got married in 1997 in Chester, where we still live. At least that's how it was. Now I don't know. I stopped to take a sip of coffee, only to find that it was cold. I told Bill to wait until I poured myself another drink. This gave me time to swallow the bile that was rising in my throat. I took a few deep breaths and held them until my stomach settled. The coffee suddenly lost its appeal, and I left the cup in the kitchen, taking a glass of water instead. I came back and sat down. Bill looked at me, and I think he understood what had happened, but he didn't say anything. My job forces me to often leave home for several days. I usually don't travel far, but sometimes I prefer to stay in a motel rather than make the long drive home. Since I have to leave again the next day, this is easier. Beth hates it, but it's easier for me. I've been doing this since we got married 8 years ago, and she knew it from the beginning. But lately she has been complaining about it more and more. So I'm trying to cut down on travel, but it doesn't seem to be enough. I had to stop for a moment as my anger flared during these thoughts. I still wanted to tell my story to Bill, but I had to suppress my anger or it would turn into complaining. Anyway, Beth and I discussed having kids, but neither of us really wanted them. She thought maybe later, but I don't think she was serious. We're lucky she didn't get pregnant. Our sex life has always been great. We made love on our first date and have been lovers ever since. We have sex about twice a week and often more. Sorry to go off on a tangent, Bill, but as I get closer to what happened, it gets more and more difficult. I hope you can be patient. I'll get there, I promise. Bill Austin. I could see that Ben was having a hard time as he approached the event that caused him to run away from home. I hadn't had to direct him until now, and he seemed to have a natural talent for storytelling. If he can continue without my interference, the story will be closer to how he sees it rather than how I direct him. He was breathing heavily now, pain showing on his face as the stress increased. I thought now would be a good time for a break. Why don't we take a break and have some iced tea? I have a gallon of sweet tea in the refrigerator that's really good. I'll get some ice and we can walk around the yard until you calm down enough to continue. I know that this can be very stressful, and it's important that you remain as calm as possible so we can get the truth about everything. What do you mean by truth? Why would I lie to you? I don't even know you enough to talk to you, but for some reason I want to. Weird, but true. Anyway, I won't lie. Not intentionally, but the mind plays tricks on us when we're in pain. I don't mean you'll lie, but stress can make you say things you don't mean or interpret things the wrong way. Let's just do it. Break, okay? Ben agreed, so I got us both a glass of iced tea, and we walked out the back door onto my little deck. We stood at the railing and looked at the trees lining my property. Behind the trees was a forest, thick and old. I explored some of the paths leading into the forest, but they led nowhere. It was nice to just stand and watch the wind move the leaves, creating silvery flashes as they turned over. We stood there for about 10 minutes, and I saw Ben begin to relax. It was nice to see the calm return to his face. I answered a few of his questions about me when he started asking. It was no secret, so I answered honestly. He seemed interested, and we talked a little about me. We stayed there for a while until it got cool. It was warm for September, but not for my age. I led Ben back into the warm kitchen, and we sat at the kitchen table, which was more informal than my office. This way, Ben could remain more relaxed. I'll wait for Ben to start his story again in a more relaxed state. Annabeth Chase. Remembering the past didn't help me. Why do I think about what I had and not about how I destroyed everything? I know I made a huge mistake, but I don't know why. How did it get to this point in my life? I loved Ben with all my heart, and he was the only man I had ever loved. I loved him from the first date and never changed this feeling. Even when we argued and quarreled, I never felt differently. I could get angry and yell at him, but I always knew he would be there if I wanted or needed him. He felt the same about me, I was sure. But now I really didn't know how he felt. All I could see was his face when he walked into the bedroom and saw me and George together. Even now, 3 days later, I saw his face. I saw him in my dreams when I closed my eyes or looked in the mirror. There was pain, disappointment, and anger in his eyes as he looked at George Jenkins. I thought again about how this happened. George and I flirted uncontrollably while on duty together at Manor House. He always found a way to be close to me on the serving line and tried to touch me in different situations. When passing me a spoon or a ladle, our hands touched longer than necessary. I understood what he was doing, but I didn't object and didn't even try to stop. I enjoyed the flirtation and the hidden promise, although I never intended to fulfill it. It was just a game, a harmless game with a nice man who was interesting and interested in me. I was flattered by this thought, but I never intended to go beyond innocent fun. The last time we worked together was just a week ago on Wednesday. I handed out mashed potatoes and George handed out vegetables. We passed out food and laughed, with a lot of touching and pushing. It was always crowded behind the counter, but not this much. But I enjoyed it as always and made an effort to flirt too. Everything was fun until the rush of people stopped and George and I went for a break. Because George smoked, I often accompanied him outside so he could smoke. I didn't feel bad because Ben also smoked sometimes. I leaned against the wall, enjoying the warm September sun on my face, and closed my eyes. George took out cigarettes and a lighter, and I waited for the metal click of the lid, not thinking about anything in particular. At that moment, when I was about to say something, I felt that he was kissing me. The shock was strong, but I opened up to him. I knew it was wrong, but it felt so good. I wanted this to continue, but I knew it couldn't, at least not here. I pulled away, pushed away from his body and kissed, and reached out my hand to stop him. Then the feeling of guilt began. What the hell am I doing? This is not my husband. It was another man, and I allowed my body to betray me, causing feelings and desires that were wrong, wrong. I tried to say something to George, but the words couldn't get through my clenched throat. It was hard for me to breathe, and finally I just turned around and ran back to the pantry, where I grabbed my coat and bag, muttered something to the first person I saw, and left. I found my car and almost instinctively drove home. At home, I ran to the bathroom, tearing off my clothes, and barely reached the shower, where I turned on the hot water and let it run, cleansing my deceptive body of these desires and sensations that humiliated me. I finally calmed down enough to start cooking dinner for Ben, and I tried my best to put the whole episode out of my head. I was ashamed of what I had done, but at the same time I was excited, and then I realized that I could no longer work at Man House with George. Today I lost control of myself, and there is no guarantee that it will not happen again under the same circumstances. I had no control or thought while this was happening, and things could have gotten a lot worse. No, I have to quit. I'll call tomorrow and let them know. I felt a lot better with this decision, and when Ben came home, I was in a good mood. We ate a nice dinner, watched TV, and went to bed, where I made Ben very, very happy. It was wonderful, and Ben was pleased. Only once did I feel a shiver of fear when he asked me what had come over me. I just laughed and said I watched Oprah. I quit as planned, and after a few weeks, everything seemed calm. Ben was working on a project near Chester where we lived, and he was always home by 5 o'clock or 5:30 p.m. Everything was fine, and I was happy. The episode with George gradually became a pleasant memory, and I began to think of other things to do with my time. Maybe a garden, something close to home, something safe. Well, I had some ideas, and I'll let them develop. A week passed when Ben told me that he needed to go to a town called Ambridge on the western side of the state. I was a little upset when I reminded him that we were planning to meet Roger and Stacy for dinner. They were two of our best friends, and we often had dinner together. When he looked at me like I was a little slow and told me to call them and cancel, I got angry. I couldn't understand how he could be so indifferent. It was too similar to how it had been before, and it was too difficult for me to bear without comment. I remember starting to argue with him, and I think I was going overboard when I screamed, calling him an insensitive bastard. I think those are the exact words I used. I know I started crying, and finally I just ran to our bedroom and lay down on the bed, sobbing inconsolably. While I lay there, Ben went to work, so we parted. I stayed there until my anger subsided and then went to my new project, an outdoor goldfish pond. Ben helped me set it up, and we planted a nice border around it with a bench to sit and watch. It was a lovely little place, and Ben and I both loved it already. But now it has lost some of its charm. I was still angry and wanted Ben to understand that he needed to start putting me first rather than his job. Maybe I was selfish, but that's how it was. I was going to discuss this with him when he returned from this trip. Ben Chase. Bill was right. Walking and fresh air had a great beneficial effect on my state of mind and body. I didn't realize how tense I was until the warm sun relaxed my clenched muscles and the constant tightness in my neck began to release. As we walked and talked about all sorts of trifles, I began to think a little about my master. Here I am, a stranger from a bar, walking and talking and generally sharing my most intimate thoughts with a man I know nothing about other than the little he's told me. The fact that I believed him without any second thoughts was strange in itself. Maybe now is the time to ask him some questions. Tell me a little about yourself, Bill. You say you've been married a long time. Yes, my wife Mary and I were married for just over 42 years. We met in college and got married after graduation, back in '61. She taught school here in Dayton until I opened my practice after finishing my internship at a hospital in Fort Wayne. We were very happy here, and neither of us ever wanted to see other parts of the world. Oh yes, we went on holiday to Mexico and Canada and Bermuda once, but other than that, it was our world. How did she die? Was it an illness, or do you mind me asking? Mary died of cancer about a year ago. She died at home, in bed, next to me. She died in her sleep. I remember waking up and immediately realizing that she was gone. When you sleep with someone for so many years, you know right away. Bill was lost in his memories, and we just walked together for another 10 minutes until Bill stopped and turned around. I think it's time to go back. It's getting a little chilly. It was very warm for September, but I followed him back. It was time to continue. Where have I been? Oh yes, I remember. I told you about our sex life and our life together. Well, like I said, Beth and I enjoyed sex with each other, and we were kind of adventurous. We tried a little bit of everything at least once, and eventually found something we liked. We stuck with it, adding a little variety for fun. But overall, our love life was great. One of the things Beth hated was my business trips. I didn't travel often, but from time to time I had to go overnight, and sometimes I stayed for a few days because it was easier for me than traveling back and forth frequently. Beth never liked being alone, and neither did I, but I thought it was better because I could be home more often. Beth had never seen it like this. She was always complaining, mostly to make sure I knew how she felt. We never got into heated arguments about this until recently. I forgot that we had dinner plans with our friends that evening. I knew I had to go because I received a call this morning about a major problem that would cause a huge delay in the project if not resolved. This would mean that I would have to spend a lot more time on site, so the only way to solve the problem is to go there and talk to a local contractor to see if anything can be done to change his decision. I had the authority to make deals on the spot, so I had no choice. But when I started telling Beth, she exploded and started screaming at me. She didn't want to listen to reasonable arguments and decided that I only did it to make her angry. She called me names, and honestly, that made me angry too, so I just told her to shut up. Well, we actually got into an argument, and she finally started crying and ran upstairs to the bedroom, slamming the door. Instead of trying to make peace with her, I was angry, so I just left without a word. That's how we left it that day. But I felt so bad that I drove to the office and spent a good 2 or 3 hours on the phone trying to figure out if there was any way to avoid this trip. I called everyone who had anything to do with the project and tried to make a deal that would avoid the delay without going over budget and would allow me to stay home and go to dinner with Roger and Stacy and make sure that Beth has forgiven me. It was on my mind, and I was determined to get it right. Well, persistence and patience paid off, and by 11:30 that morning I had closed the deal and the project was moving forward as scheduled. The deal I got was a very good one, if I do say so myself, and I was pretty proud of my incredible negotiation skills. I couldn't wait to tell Beth. I picked up the phone, but then I thought, what the hell? I left the office, went outside to a flower shop I saw and bought a bouquet of fresh-cut flowers. I decided to apologize to Beth in person with a bouquet of flowers. Annabeth Chase. I sat in front of the pond and just watched the golden flashes as the fish flashed in the crystal clear water. The new pump and filter that Ben brought home last week was doing its job, keeping the water clean and clear. The goldfish seemed happy. I just let my mind calm down while watching them. I was just drifting when I heard a voice from the direction of the house. I looked up and saw George Jenkins coming from the direction of the house. "George, what are you doing here? Where did you come from?" "Sorry, Annabeth. I didn't mean to scare you. I knocked but no one answered, so I remembered what you said about your fish and decided to walk around to see if you were here. And here you are." "What are you doing here, George? I don't think it's a good idea for you to be here. I wish you would go away." "Please, Annabeth. I just wanted to apologize for what happened and beg you to forgive me. I value our friendship and can't stand it if we can't get it back." "There's nothing to forgive here, George. Now please just leave, please." Instead of leaving as I asked, George walked over to the bench and sat down next to me. He took my face in his hands and tilted it to look into my eyes. "I'm not leaving until you forgive me, Annabeth. Will you forgive me?" I looked into his eyes and was lost. I couldn't speak when he held my face in his hands. I started to tremble, and he leaned over and kissed me like the last time we were together. "God forgive me," I kissed him back. He stood up from the bench, took my hands, and lifted me up. He put his arm around my waist and led me back up the steps to the kitchen. When we were inside, he asked, "Why don't we move to the bedroom? I want to make love to you, my Beth. Let me give you the pleasure you deserve." I took his hand and led him upstairs to our bedroom. A thought flashed through my mind about Ben, but it disappeared in a fit of anger. It was his fault that he wasn't where he should be. I must admit that at that moment I was not thinking. I was simply reacting to sexual pleasure, and there was no love in it. It was just lust, and I gave into it. Ben wasn't even on my mind. I didn't cheat on him because at that moment he didn't exist for me. Only George was real. When I heard some noise, I looked towards the door and saw Ben Chase. I drove home with flowers and an apology, which I continued to rehearse along the way. I needed to make sure Beth heard me loud and clear. I didn't want anything to come between us and our marriage. If work became too burdensome, I would find something else. I just needed her to know that, and to know that I loved her enough to do everything in my power to make her happy. I'll do this for her. I drove into our yard and noticed a dark blue Range Rover parked in front of the house. I didn't recognize him, but it wasn't that strange. Often people would park in front of our house when there was a party next door, or if someone was visiting neighbors across the street, they had to park in the direction of traffic, or they could get fined. So sometimes people would just park and walk across the street. Either way, he wasn't bothering me, so I just ignored him. I took the flowers and went into the house. The house was quiet, which meant Beth was probably upstairs in the spare room, working on her signs and plaques for one of her charities. She spent a lot of time there, so we made the room very cozy, with lots of light and lots of shelves for her things. I quietly walked up the stairs to surprise her. When I reached the top of the stairs, I started to walk to the right, towards the spare room, when I heard sounds coming from our bedroom. I stopped and walked that way, holding the flowers in front of me as a peace offering. I crept to the door and looked inside. What I saw almost gave me a heart attack. This picture is imprinted in my mind. I can't forget her. It's as clear as a photograph, and as hard to look at as a train wreck. I didn't recognize him. This is the picture that is imprinted in my brain. My wife, with another man in our bed. It wasn't a mistake. She enjoyed it. I could see it in her face. That was all I needed to see. I dropped the flowers, turned around, and ran down the stairs to my car. I got in the car, started it, and drove off, finishing here 2 days later. I didn't call and tell her where I was, and I don't want to. I don't know what I want to do. I know what my father did, and now I understand why. Here's my story. I looked at Bill and was surprised to see tears in his eyes. He listened carefully and calmly to my story, and I must admit that I felt much better after telling it to someone. I fell into a chair. Annabeth Chase. The shock of seeing Ben standing there was more than I could handle. I just stared at him with my mouth open, unable to find words. I was shocked. Ben, my Ben, he shouldn't have been home. He was driving west to some abandoned place in western Pennsylvania. I didn't see him, did I? Suddenly, I realized what I was doing and what Ben saw when he looked through the doorway. Panic overtook me, and I almost lost consciousness. I moved to try to stop him when I stepped on some scattered flowers. I stopped as if I had run into a brick wall. I looked at the bouquet of flowers, now scattered along the corridor, and fell. I slumped to the floor, and a huge feeling of guilt fell on my shoulders like a weight I couldn't bear, weighing me down until I couldn't breathe. I tried to find air, but nothing worked. I couldn't move, I couldn't cry, and I couldn't call for help. I just sat there, leaning against the wall, my bare legs surrounded by the flowers Ben had brought me. George came out into the hallway, asking me what happened. He didn't see Ben and didn't know why I ran out of the room. I heard his voice asking what happened and what happened. I couldn't answer him. I just sat there, leaning against the wall, my naked body indecently exposed to him. Suddenly, it was nothing more than a disgusting episode of a wife cheating with a man she barely knew, in the bed she shared with her husband. Now the truth was back, and the truth made me sick. I jumped up and ran to the bathroom, sick in my heart and soul. I closed and locked the door, turning to the toilet just in time. When George came and knocked, asking if everything was okay, I just cowered there on the bathroom floor and didn't answer until he left. I stayed there for the next hour until I felt it was safe to leave. George is gone, thank God. I turned the shower on full blast and stood there, letting the water wash away the shame. I didn't have any answers to give Ben if he wanted to ask. I didn't know why I did what I did to George in our bed in our house. I had enough shame to fill the hole in my heart, but no answers. I didn't even know where Ben was or when he would return, if at all. Ben was not a person who would accept what I did. I had no choice but to wait for his verdict. Bill Austin. Now it was clear to me how Ben felt. His mother betrayed his father, and his father couldn't handle it. He ultimately decided to commit suicide rather than try to accept the reality of what his wife had done. At that age, Ben knew nothing about fidelity or betrayal, and all he saw was his father leaving him. This was all the reality a boy his age could understand. Moreover, because of the trauma caused by her role in her husband's death, the mother fought an unsuccessful battle with guilt, remorse, and loss. She also could not cope with the pain she caused her husband, and she also committed suicide. Ben interpreted both of these actions as betrayal. Both his parents abandoned him and left him alone. He grew up with this belief, never learning the real story until he was 18. By that time, the kind of person he became had already been formed. The truth then was more academic than anything else. Annabeth, Ben's wife, cheated on him with another man. Ben had to deal with it somehow, but his coping mechanisms were formed during those years in a house with very similar circumstances. But even though he now understood the reasons for his parents' actions, subconsciously he only saw facts. His mother cheated, which led to his father's death. His father's death led to his mother killing herself. Now his wife has cheated. His actions were already suggested by themselves. That's why I told Beth she'd better stay away from Ben right now. His actions will be difficult to predict given his past. Obviously, Beth didn't know this part of his past and didn't understand the irony of what she did. Cheating on its own is bad enough, but for someone with Ben's past, it could be deadly. It is very likely that someone will get hurt. I looked at my watch, surprised that we had talked all morning and part of the afternoon. Finally, I stood up, telling Ben that we needed to have dinner and then talk some more. When he told me that I had already heard his whole story, I just laughed and said that we have a lot more to discuss now that I know his past. This made him a little tense, but I assured him that we weren't going into really deep topics and that he was just a little crazy. This made him laugh, so I left it for later. I thought we could go back to the bar where we met yesterday for dinner and a few beers. Ben was clearly more relaxed now, and I wanted him to stay that way. Ben Chase. Telling my story to Bill really made me feel exhausted. I was as tired as if I had spent the day working in a factory like my father. My back hurt, my legs ached, and I felt like I could sleep for a month. It was partly tension, partly fatigue, and partly emotion. I didn't know which was which, I was just exhausted. When Bill suggested that we should talk some more, I don't think I wanted to hear it, but then he broke the tension with a joke and suggested we go out to dinner. I could have eaten and really wanted a beer, so off we went. At the bar, it was much the same. It was later now than when I first met Bill, and there were a lot more people there. Bill seemed to know many of them, as greetings came from everywhere. He seemed very popular, his boyfriend. I observed him as he interacted with several people and found him to be smooth and casual. That was my impression of him too, so I guess he was what he seemed. We sat down at the table and Bill ordered burgers and onion rings for both of us with a cold beer. I relaxed and began to look around. I watched several attractive women approach some guys and concluded that they were professionals. When I mentioned this to Bill, he simply nodded yes and left it at that. I was fine with that. While I was eating my burger, I saw a well-dressed woman about my age enter the bar, look around, and then sit down on a stool. She was very attractive and very well-groomed. She looked different than most of the pros, and I watched as several guys tried to hit on her, but she rejected them all. Curious, I continued to watch to see what she was doing. I noticed a man at the other end of the bar looking in her direction, but making no move. Now I was intrigued and continued to watch. My curiosity was rewarded when she nodded her head slightly at him, got off the stool, and walked towards the toilets. The man from the bar followed her. I told Bill I wanted to use the restroom and followed them. I stood back, watching as they met in the hallway, not noticing me, pressed against the wall in the shadows. They whispered, and she reached out and lightly touched his cheek. Then I noticed the wedding ring. She walked away and returned to the bar. He did the same, but put the money on the bar and walked out instead of returning to his seat. A minute later, the woman also left. I realized that I had just witnessed a secret meeting, and the woman was probably married and wanted to meet her lover. They came here separately and then left together. I realized that somewhere out there some man was deceived, just like me. Suddenly, the pain and grief I felt that night at home came flooding back. Along with the pain came a feeling of rage so strong towards this stupid bitch and her lover. What the hell were they doing? Someone needed to teach them a lesson. I gasped, trying to breathe, and felt the blood drain from my head. I was almost on the verge of fainting when I stood up and almost ran out of the bar into the cool night air. I ran out the door and looked around, but they were already gone. Suddenly, the rage disappeared, and I swayed to the side and bent over, trying to catch my breath. The burger he had just eaten came back out in an explosive eruption. I vomited with everything I had and continued to vomit until I began to have cramps. I was sweating and trying to pull myself together when I felt Bill's hand on my shoulder. "Don't resist, Ben. Let it control you first. Let it take its course. You have no choice but to let it come out. This will pass. Just let go. Do not resist. Just breathe, easy breaths, easy breaths." His words didn't mean much, but his soothing voice helped. The rage that threatened to overwhelm me disappeared. I forgot about the pain and discomfort and focused on his voice. "Do not resist. Let go." Over and over until I was finally able to hear the words and begin to follow his advice. I was shaking violently, but the cramps began to subside, the blood rushed to my brain again, and I was able to straighten up and lean against the cool bricks of the outer wall of the bar. Things started to become clear, and I saw Bill standing there with a worried look on his face. I tried to smile at him. "I'm fine now. It goes away, and I feel much better. I'm sorry I scared you. Can you tell me what happened? Do you know what triggered this? It's important to tell me what happened. You can do it." I nodded and took a few deep breaths, feeling the tension bands release and my breathing become normal again. I was watching a woman at a bar. She was my age, quite beautiful and well-dressed. She wasn't a professional because she turned down several guys who tried to pick her up. I noticed a man at the other end of the bar and saw how they were looking at each other. I followed them as they walked towards the toilets and saw them kiss and exchange words. He then left the bar, and she followed him a few minutes later. I realized that they had met and that she was cheating on her husband. That's all I remember up to this point. Bill shook his head, apparently understanding. He must have known who she was because he didn't say anything when he saw me watching her. He seemed satisfied with what I told him, but for God's sake, I didn't know why. But he decided it was time for us to return to his house, and so we did. Bill Austin. Once Ben told me what he experienced and what caused it, I knew that my initial opinion was correct. Ben was very close to moving in the direction his subconscious was pulling him, and violence was just around the corner. I saw the rage in his eyes just before he stood up and ran towards the door. If he had found them, I was sure he would have used violence. I was sure that he also felt the same pain that brought him to me, and I knew that he would have to fight to stay sane, but his coping mechanisms were clearly unable to cope with it. I needed to do something. Ben was able to calm down on the way back to my house. He had experienced 2 major shocks to his system in less than 72 hours, and it was beginning to take its toll on him. I knew that without my help, he was becoming more and more inclined to take some drastic measures. I feared that, given his past, self-harm was high on his list, even if he didn't see it himself. I saw it growing. Something had to be done. Annabeth Chase. I was still waiting for a response from the person who called yesterday. He said that Ben was with him and that it would be unwise to talk to him right now. I didn't agree, but since I didn't know who he was or where he and Ben were, I had no choice. I didn't know what else to do except wait. I called Man House and said I couldn't help anymore. George called me 3 or 4 times, and each time I asked him not to call again. The last time I finally told him that Ben saw us then, and George was shocked. He wanted to know what Ben said, and I told him that Ben had left and hadn't called me since. George was very upset about this, but then asked if I would like to meet again. I told him that my marriage is the only thing on my mind right now, and that's all I care about. He promised to stay in touch, but I just hung up without answering. I spent the last day wondering what the man meant when he asked me about Ben's parents. What does it matter? I didn't remember Ben saying anything other than that they died in the accident. I didn't know what kind of accident it was, and Ben never said anything. Maybe this is important. I thought about it and decided to take a chance and call Pearl, Ben's grandmother. I could ask her if she has more information. Having made up my mind, I found her number and called her from my mobile phone. I wanted to keep the line open in case that person called again. I found Pearl at home and talked to her for a few minutes. It was difficult as we didn't have much in common, and she and I never became close. Ben was her only concern, and she didn't have much left for others, including me. But she was polite, and I finally asked her about Ben's parents. Her answer was strange. First, she asked me where Ben was. When I said that he was on a business trip, she asked several questions, making it clear that she did not believe me. She then asked me what he was telling me, and I said he said they died in an accident. She remained silent at this, but finally asked me to come to her house to talk. I quickly agreed, now intrigued by her attitude. When I arrived about an hour later, she was already waiting for me. She asked me to sit in the small family room of her house and brought me a plate of cookies and a teapot. We sat down, and she poured tea like a little old lady from high society. I knew she came from a poor family, so I assumed she had learned some manners to rise above her early surroundings. She seemed pleased with this, so I accepted her offer of tea. Well, what made you suddenly become interested in our Ben's family? Did something happen that made you curious? No, not at all. Someone asked me this the other day, and I realized that I know very little. Ben never seemed comfortable talking about this, so I thought I'd ask you. I think he won't mind. I'm sure he'll be against it, but it doesn't matter. What happened is important, and the reason for your question may be very important. Did you do something to make Ben leave home? How the hell did she know? Was it a lucky guess? I decided to continue and see what happens. Nothing happened. Ben's on a business trip, like I said. I just wanted to know what really happened. I don't believe you, girl. I don't know you well at all, but I can tell when someone is lying. What did you do to make him run? Crap. I needed to say something, so I decided to tell the truth. Maybe she'll be shocked enough to tell me what really happened. So I told her, and she listened grimly when I got to the part about Ben seeing us together. That's when I realized that there really were problems. Pearl just stared at me when I finished, and then shook her head. Okay, here's what happened, and you better listen carefully, because you've opened a big can of worms. Listen, Ben's parents both committed suicide. His father first when he was 8 years old, and his mother a year later. That's why I raised him from the age of 9. He never knew what happened until he was 18. By that time, what kind of person he became was already formed, and it didn't matter. I don't understand. How does this relate to what I saw and what Ben saw? Pauline, Ben's mother, my daughter, cheated on his father, Howard. Pauline told Howard about it, and it broke his heart. He tried to deal with it, but he couldn't. He waited for about 2 months and then shot himself. Colina found him in this form when she returned from work. I think he left her a note, but she told me the note was really bad and she tore it up instead of keeping it. But it was already too late. Pauline tried to hold on and raise Ben, but she couldn't get over what she did to Howard. She wrote Ben a letter explaining everything and then killed herself. She lay dead in her bed, in full view for her son, who found her. My God, this is madness. How could they do this to a little boy and leave him alone? What was wrong with them? I was amazed at the cruelty of what they did, until suddenly I realized what it meant. Ben saw me do the same thing as his mother. I cheated on him, just like his mother cheated on his father. I looked at Pearl, now realizing that she was wanted to tell me. Oh my God, what have I done? More than you know, girl. Ben grew up believing that his parents deliberately abandoned him. He was angry with them and never forgave them. When he read the letter, he could understand what they did, but it was too late and he did not accept it. They left him. That's all he knew, and it started with his mother cheating on him. Now do you see? I saw and understood. Now I knew what that man meant when he asked me those questions and told me to stay away from Ben for now. He knew. Ben must have told him. He must have thought I was unfaithful, knowing his history. He must have thought I was cruel and stupid. But is that really true? Ben Chase. Bill wanted to talk this evening, but I didn't want to. I felt a little strange, maybe because everything was finally starting to get to me. I wasn't mad at Beth anymore. She wasn't worth my anger. She's just a cheater, and there are too many of them. Just an ordinary woman of easy virtue, like my mother. And like my mother, Beth destroyed our marriage. Well, I'll deal with her, but not like my father. He took the easy way out. I won't. Beth will pay. Bill Austin. Ben was too calm and quiet for my liking. I wanted to talk, but he seemed too withdrawn and didn't want to be drawn into the conversation. This bothered me a lot, but I couldn't force him to. Maybe tomorrow morning he will be in a better mood. I'll wait and see. When Ben said goodnight to me, I relaxed a little. A good night's sleep will do him good, and we can delve into some things tomorrow. Ben Chase. I got up early while it was still dark. Bill was asleep when I collected my things and carried them to the car. I decided last night to end this farce. I needed to get back to Chester to straighten things out and make Beth pay. It was the right decision. When I made this decision, I felt calm and my stomach relaxed. I was quiet because I didn't want to explain to Bill what I was going to do. I left him a note giving him my address in Chester so he could send me an invoice for everything I owed him. I decided it was only fair since he had done so much for me. I left a little before 6 o'clock that morning and was relieved to head home. I pulled onto the highway, put the cruise control on, and tried to make my plans. Everything had to be done at once. She shouldn't be given too much time to complicate matters. I wanted everything to be done. I smiled, anticipating the pain she would feel when I dealt the killing blow. Maybe she'll start to feel some of the things I feel. I doubted this since she apparently had no feelings for me. If she had, she would never have done this. Well, she can't do it anymore. I will take care of it. I drove non-stop, reaching home in just under 2 days. I used my cell phone to call work and say that I was taking 2 weeks of emergency leave to attend to personal matters. I left all the necessary instructions so that my people could continue the project. Once that was done, I called the few other people I needed to complete the plans. I'll deal with them personally when I get back to town. The last thing I did was book a room at the Holiday Inn Express just off the highway and only 7 miles from my house. I wasn't going to tell Beth I was back in town. I wanted to make sure she stayed home where I could find her when the time came. Time for her to pay the final price for her betrayal. Father made a mistake, but I won't do it. He hurt himself because of her betrayal in her place, but not me. No, sir, she must pay. Bill Austin. When I found the note and saw that Ben was gone, I knew I had to call Mrs. Chase and let her know that she might be in danger. I got the clear impression that Ben had no intention of hurting himself. I was rather afraid for her. I was afraid that he was planning to harm his wife. I had to tell her about this as soon as possible. It would take him a while to get home, and she could use that time to drive away and hide somewhere where he couldn't find her. I took the number from my office and called her again. She answered the first call. Hello? Is that you, Ben? Hello, Mrs. Chase. This is Bill Austin, the one who called you 2 days ago. Do you remember? Yes, sure. How's Ben? Is he there, and can I talk to him? Now I understand that you tried to ask me last time, and I didn't know then, but now I know. Please let me talk to him. It's important that I tell him what I have to do. Please? Mrs. Chase, listen to me. Ben isn't here. He's heading back to Chester, and I'm worried. He left me a note saying he was going to make it right this time. He means his father. I think he may be planning to hurt you instead of himself, just like his father did. I believe he believes his father was wrong to kill himself. He feels like he should have done something with his mother. Do you understand me? There was silence on the other end for several seconds. I hoped that I had conveyed the message to her that she was in real danger. She needed to believe this in order to take appropriate measures to protect herself. Ben won't hurt me, Mr. Austin. I believe this with all my heart. I know Ben, and he is not a violent person. He'll come home and let me explain. He is one of the kindest and most understanding people I have ever known. I believe in him and will wait for him. But thanks for letting me know. Please, Mrs. Chase, don't be stupid. Ben is in shock right now, and he's unpredictable. I believe you are in danger. Please, be careful. Thank you again, Mr. Austin. I will be fine, and thank you for taking care of Ben during this time. Goodbye. I tried to convince her to change her mind, but she had already hung up. She didn't believe she was in danger, but I did. I couldn't call the police because I had no evidence other than my gut feelings. I'll wait a couple of days and call again. I'll hope for the best until then. Annabeth Chase. To me, no matter what he said, Ben would never hurt me. Just because his parents committed suicide due to cheating, this is not about Ben. He would never do anything like that to me or himself. I believed it. What I did to George wasn't cheating, at least not yet. We've only had one, if you don't count the time at Manhouse. Either way, Ben would forgive me, I was sure of it. Ben was a nonviolent person and had incredible patience with me and my mistakes. It was just a mistake. Pleasant for me, but a mistake that I will not repeat again. I had to make sure I looked my best and that there was enough beer and pizza in the fridge. This is what he likes when he wants to relax. I wanted him to be relaxed and calm when we talked. I knew that he would try to understand what I did and forgive me. I thought about it and decided not to mention that it was partly his fault. It too, just that I was upset. It is better. If he can forgive me, we can get through this. Go ahead and continue. Ben will forgive me, I'm sure of it. Ben is not a cruel person and has incredible patience for my mistakes. It's just a mistake. Pleasant for me, but a mistake that I will not repeat again. I had to make sure I looked my best and that there was enough beer and pizza in the fridge. This is what he likes when he wants to relax and unwind. I wanted him to be relaxed and calm when we talked. I knew that he would try to understand what I did and forgive me. I was sure of it. I thought about it and decided not to mention the part about it being partly his fault. It would be too much. Just to say I was upset. It is better. If he can forgive me, we can get through this and move on. Ben will forgive me, I'm sure of it. Ben is not a cruel person and has incredible patience for my mistakes. It's just a mistake. Pleasant for me, but a mistake that I will not repeat again. Ben Chase. The accounts were closed, the money was transferred to a new account at another bank, and I withdrew $5,000 in cash, which I put in an envelope. This was to be left in the mailbox at the designated post office by J.D. Peterson, the gentleman who would handle this evening for me. Since we had never met in person, I was only too happy to leave the money there and go on my way. He knew what to do, where to be, and he had everything he needed to finish the job. He was okay with it, and so was I. I finished my business and had lunch at a diner out of town. It was a little after 11:30 when I called Mr. Peterson. When he responded, I told him that the money had been left in the designated mailbox and that I was ready to go. He wished me a safe trip and said he would call my new number when everything was done. I told him to be sure he would arrive at the house promptly at 8 o'clock so I would know when that would be. He agreed, told me not to worry, and wished me a safe journey. I asked the waitress to pack my coffee to go and left the diner. I was on my way to Mexico and my new life. I wanted to be out of the US by evening, so I booked a flight to Phoenix, Arizona, and planned to cross the border south of Tucson at Nogales, Mexico. I had to be there by 8 p.m. I will be outside the jurisdiction of American courts and could disappear for a long time. This was the plan. I had a contact there who would get me a job, and I didn't need luxury, just enough to live on. I was ready to be single for a long time, and this place was perfect for that. Annabeth Chase. I looked at my watch again, and it was only 7:30, just a minute later than last time. I was nervous, eager for it to start, and a little afraid of what might happen. What if Ben can't forgive me? I didn't want to live without him, but he might not agree. I could only hope and pray that I didn't ruin my life with him. That was my biggest fear, that he wouldn't take me back. Maybe I messed things up too much. But no, not Ben. He will forgive me. I was sure of it. Ben is not a cruel person and has incredible patience for my mistakes. It's just a mistake. Pleasant for me, but a mistake that I will not repeat again. What time is it? 7:35. I checked again to make sure the pizza was cooking and the beer was cold. I stocked up in the fridge to be sure. I set the pizza to cook so that it would be ready at 8 o'clock sharp, so we could sit down to a hot pizza and a cold beer, Ben's favorite. Perfect. He will be in a good mood, so he will listen to me. Yes, Ben Chase. I crossed the border at the checkpoint at 7:21 p.m., which was almost perfect. Now I was in Mexico with less than 40 minutes left. I could get to the little bar I found last time here, and there I would wait. It was exactly 7:50 when I parked the car, locked it, and went to the bar. It was cool and dark inside, perfect for waiting. I took a table, and a nice girl took my order. Since I spoke fluent Spanish, she smiled and swayed her hips as she walked back to get a beer. She was very nice, but she was a woman, and I didn't want anything to do with them right now. I looked at my watch, and it was already 7:55. 5 minutes left. Annabeth Chase. It was 7:55 with a few minutes left. I wondered if Ben would be on time or try to make me nervous by being late. I'll wait and see. I didn't care. The main thing was that he came. I waited, more nervous than I had ever been in my life. What will happen tonight? I didn't know and could only pray. When the clock struck 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was Ben. He came. I checked my face in the mirror in the hallway and walked towards the door. I stopped to collect myself and opened the door. Annabeth Chase. The man standing in the doorway was not Ben. He was tall, dark-haired, with a hard and cruel expression on his face. He just looked at me, and I looked at him. Finally, I found my voice and asked who it was. "You're not Ben. Who are you, and where is my husband? Are you Annabeth Chase, Ben Chase's wife?" I just looked at him, not understanding what he was doing. Finally, I answered, "Yes, I'm Beth. Who are you?" "I have something from your husband. He wanted me to deliver this to you personally." As he spoke, he reached into his jacket pocket. Ben Chase. It was exactly 8 o'clock. Peterson should be knocking on the door now. I watched the second hand on my watch and waited exactly 1 minute. Here, it's all over. I am now a free person and can do whatever I want. The feeling was not what I had hoped, but it was what I expected. A little sad, but also exciting. Done. I finished the bottle and left the bar, heading south. Annabeth Chase. He took out an envelope and handed it to me. With nothing else to do, I took it. As soon as the envelope was in my hands, he began to speak, reading from the note he held in one hand. "Annabeth Chase, you have been notified. These are the divorce papers signed by your husband Ben and filed in family court. Mr. Chase assured me to act on his behalf, and I provided a list of all the assets that you and Mr. Chase shared. In the envelope, you will find checks for half of the cash assets. All joint credit cards have been canceled. The house is registered in Mr. Chase's name and is for sale. Once the sale is completed, you will receive half the profit after paying the mortgage and all closing costs. The car you are currently using is registered in your name, and you are responsible for all payments." I stood there, listening to him, but not quite understanding the words. I was stunned. Ben divorced me, without even talking to me. I couldn't believe it. I didn't believe it. Where is my husband? Where's Ben? This is unfair. This was just one time. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that. Please tell me where Ben is. I have to talk to him. Please. I collapsed on the floor in the doorway, and the man turned around and left. He turned around only once to tell me that I could contact him at the number on his business card in an envelope. I finally stood up and walked back to the house that was no longer my home with Ben. He left, and I was left alone. I received an answer. Ben couldn't and wouldn't forgive me. I understood. He saw his mother in me, and I confirmed his opinion of her. We are all unfaithful, and he leaves me like his father did. But Ben chose to live without me where his father chose to die rather than be with her. Like father, like son, but their choice was their own. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next